evening, or morning, or whatever time it happens to be where you're listening. This is Adam Cross, broadcasting from somewhere I'd rather not disclose. Not because I don't want to be found, but because I don't know who might be listening. If you're hearing this, congratulations. You've survived another day. That's not a small thing anymore. I'm not sure how long this old transmitter will hold up, or if anyone can even hear me. But I have to try. Someone has to document what's happening, what happened, and give those of you still out there some hope, or at the very least, the truth. Let me tell you a little about myself first. I was a radio host for one of those late night shows, the kind where people call in with their problems and I pretend to have solutions. My station was just outside the city, a cozy little place with a coffee machine that never worked and walls too thin to block out the wind. Simple, quiet, unremarkable. I never thought it would become my sanctuary, but here I am, locked away, surrounded by canned food and wires, talking to whoever might be listening. Because the world outside, it's gone. It all started 3 weeks ago. Or was it 4? Time doesn't mean much anymore. The first reports came from big cities, people collapsing in the streets, convulsing like they'd been hit by lightning. And then they'd get up, but they weren't the same. They moved differently, like puppets with invisible strings pulling them. Their eyes, those eyes were the worst. Cloudy, unfocused, but somehow aware. The news called it an outbreak. They said it was a virus, something new and highly contagious, the kind of thing that spreads faster than fear itself. They told us to stay calm. They always say that. But calm doesn't stop a tidal wave. I've been monitoring emergency frequencies ever since. At first it was chaos. Dispatchers overwhelmed with calls, hospitals begging for supplies, and people crying out for someone, anyone, to help. I intercepted a call from a father trapped in his car, his children screaming in the back seat while something pounded on the windows. The line went dead before I could hear what happened. Then there was the nurse whispering into her phone from under a hospital bed. She described the way her patients turned one by one, tearing into each other like animals. Her voice broke when she said her coworker, the one who had just turned, was crawling towards her. The last thing I heard was a scream, then static. Now the emergency channels are mostly silent. Sometimes I catch fragments of voices, but they're faint, distant, like echoes from a world that's already gone. I've pieced together what I can. The virus, or whatever this is, starts with a fever, then come the seizures. After that, well, you've seen what happens next. Or maybe you haven't. If you're lucky, you're somewhere safe, away from the cities, the towns, the roads where they roam. But I doubt there's anywhere truly safe anymore. Maybe you're wondering why I'm doing this, why I'm risking my neck to send out these broadcasts when there's no guarantee anyone's listening. The truth? I don't know. Maybe it's guilt, maybe it's stubbornness, or maybe it's just because talking to the void is better than the silence. But I also believe in stories. They matter. They're how we make sense of the chaos, how we find meaning in the madness. So if you're out there, if you're scared, if you're alone, know this, you're not forgotten. You're not alone. I'm here, and I'll keep talking as long as I can. Stay away from the cities. If you hear someone calling for help, be cautious. It might not be what it seems. And whatever you do, don't let your guard down after dark. They're faster at night. If you're listening, stay alive. Tonight, I want to take you back to where this all began. I've spent countless nights trying to piece it together, digging through old recordings, intercepted messages, anything I could scavenge to make sense of how we ended up here. It's a mosaic of chaos, shattered memories, and chilling truths. It started like any other day. People went to work, kids went to school, and the world spun on its axis, blissfully unaware of what was about to happen. The first reports came out of New York City. A commuter collapsed on the subway during rush hour. Nothing unusual, right? People faint all the time. stress, dehydration. But this was different. Witnesses said the man started convulsing violently. His body twisted and contorted in ways that didn't seem possible, like something was trying to escape from inside him. And then he stopped, just lay there, lifeless. For a moment, everyone thought it was over, until he stood up. What happened next was a blur of screams, blood, and panic. By the time the police arrived, half the subway car was dead, or worse. Similar incidents started popping up in other cities. Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlanta, each one more horrific than the last. People collapsing in public spaces, schools, hospitals. By noon, social media was flooded with grainy videos of seizures and frenzied attacks. Hashtags like the collapse and stay inside were trending. But no one knew what to do. No one knew how bad it would get. I intercepted a communication from a local emergency operator that day. That operator, she was one of the first casualties recorded on the emergency frequencies. I don't even know her name. Hospitals became war zones by the afternoon. Patients, doctors, nurses, all of them targets. One recording I intercepted still haunts me. It came from Dr. Emily Carter, an ER physician in Seattle. Dr. Carter's hospital was one of the first to fall. The patients, the staff, none of them made it out. And that was just the beginning. By the end of the day, the streets were unrecognizable. Smoke and ash hung in the air like a funeral shroud. The military was called in, but it was too late. I remember watching a live news broadcast briefly before the signal was lost. Rows of soldiers standing at checkpoints, trying to keep order, civilians begging to be let through, and then the screaming started. The infected don't feel pain. Bullets slow them down, but they don't stop unless you destroy the brain. It took hours for anyone to figure that out, and by then, the soldiers were already overwhelmed. Day zero wasn't just the beginning of the outbreak. It was the beginning of the end. The collapse of everything we thought was safe and permanent. But here's the thing. The more I've looked into this, the more I've realized it wasn't an accident. I intercepted a classified message later that night. It was short, garbled, but unmistakable. Containment failed. Deploying protocol Red Horizon. That's when I knew this wasn't just some freak virus or random disaster. Someone somewhere let this happen. I don't know why. Not yet, but I promise you I'm gonna find out. For now, all you need to know is this. Whatever is out there, whatever caused this, it's not done with us yet. This is Adam Cross, signing off for now. If you're listening, stay alive. This is Adam Cross, and tonight we look back at the night everything came undone. The night the cities fell. I wasn't in one of those cities when it happened. I wasn't standing in the chaos, feeling the heat of the fires or the pressure of the crowd as it surged and broke. But through the radio waves, through the intercepted transmissions, and the desperate pleas for help, I witnessed it all. Every scream, every explosion, every agonizing second of humanity's downfall played out like a ghostly symphony in my headphones. Los Angeles was one of the first to go. The National Guard had set up barricades, cutting off every major artery in and out of the city. I remember hearing one of their transmissions, a frantic voice describing how the infected were piling onto the highways. I could almost picture it, the endless rows of abandoned cars, the smell of gasoline and fear. They said the barricades were holding until they weren't. One soldier, a young voice trembling with panic, reported that the infected weren't just coming, they were climbing, scaling the cars and fences like animals driven by nothing but hunger. His words were cut off mid-sentence. I never heard his voice again. New York followed shortly after. The city that never sleeps became the city that screamed. Midtown, once alive with tourists and business people, turned into a feeding ground.
A satellite feed I intercepted described how the infected moved through the streets like a living tide. Shoulder to shoulder, they poured through the avenues, relentless and unyielding.
One drone operator's report still lingers in my mind. He described the aerial view of the chaos, the buildings crumbling under the weight of explosions and fire. His voice broke when he mentioned the people, small, desperate dots scattering beneath the shadow of the swarm. He knew they wouldn't make it, and he was powerless to stop it. But it wasn't just the big cities. It wasn't just New York or Los Angeles. Everywhere, people were trying to survive, to cling to some semblance of hope. That's when I started getting fragments of survivor messages. People broadcasting on short-range frequencies, hoping someone, anyone, was listening. One message came from a woman trapped in a mall. She described how she'd gone there for supplies, thinking it would be safe, only to find herself surrounded. She said the infected stood outside the glass storefronts, staring in as if they knew she was there. Waiting. She spoke about seeing a family try to escape, how the father didn't make it. Her voice cracked when she admitted she hadn't done anything to help them. I could hear the guilt, the despair in her words, and I could feel my own. I couldn't do anything for her either. And then there was Karen, or at least that's the name I've given her in my mind. She didn't give her name in her message. She didn't have to. Her story, her fear was universal. She was everyone, trying to survive in a world that had turned against us. But the most chilling part of that night wasn't the collapse itself. It wasn't the screams or the silence that followed. It was what I learned after. Late that night, as the last major broadcasts went dark, I picked up a garbled military transmission. They used a phrase I didn't understand at the time. Initiate Red Horizon Protocol. It was the tone that struck me first, the cold detachment of whoever was giving the order. I could tell this wasn't about saving anyone. Later, I managed to piece together what Red Horizon meant. It wasn't containment. It wasn't evacuation. It was eradication. Entire neighborhoods burned to the ground, firebombed to stop the infection from spreading. One intercepted report described a city, a name I couldn't catch, being completely obliterated in what they called a preventative strike. I don't know how many innocent people were caught in those flames, but I know it wasn't just the infected. And then there was the scientist. His voice was faint, almost drowned out by the static. He wasn't speaking to me. He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. It was more like he was trying to leave a record, something that might outlive him. He said the virus wasn't natural, that it was too perfect, too aggressive to have come from the wild. He spoke of mutations, of alterations, deliberate changes made in a lab. He didn't finish his story. The sound of his breath quickening, his footsteps echoing as he ran down some unseen corridor, told me all I needed to know. The night the cities fell wasn't just the collapse of civilization. It was the unveiling of a greater truth. This wasn't an accident. Someone did this. And as I sit here speaking into the void, I can't help but wonder if they're still out there, watching, listening, waiting for their plans to come to fruition. This is Adam Cross, signing off for now. If you're listening, keep going. Stay sharp, stay safe, and stay alive. This is Adam Cross, back on the air. Tonight, I want to tell you about a place, a town, one you won't find on any map. A place swallowed by silence and secret. This is the story of Echo Ridge, or, at least, that's what the locals called it before it vanished. The first time I heard about Echo Ridge, it was from a garbled transmission sent out by a survivor. I almost missed it, just a faint signal breaking through the noise. The man's voice was shaky, like he was trying to keep himself together as the world around him fell apart. He said his name was Jackson, but I could hear the strain in his tone, like he was unsure whether his name even mattered anymore. Jackson talked about a quarantine. The military had sealed off the town after the first signs of infection appeared. At first, the soldiers patrolled the streets, keeping everyone indoors. But then the infected came, not from within the town, but from outside it. The soldiers fought hard. Jackson said he saw them setting up barricades, running patrols, shouting orders to each other. For a while, it seemed like they might actually hold the line. And then one night, they just disappeared. The next morning, Jackson said the streets were empty. No soldiers, no bodies, just silence. He tried to convince himself they'd retreated, that reinforcements would arrive. But the silence stretched on, and the infected started to creep back into the town, as if they knew the defenders were gone. Jackson's message ended abruptly. His last words were a whisper. They're watching. They're always watching. I didn't know what to make of it at the time. A lone survivor's ramblings could mean anything, or nothing. But then I intercepted another transmission, this time from what sounded like a military frequency. It wasn't meant for public ears. That much was clear. The voice on the recording was urgent, almost frantic. The soldier spoke of losing contact with Echo Ridge. They described how every attempt to reach the troops stationed there ended in dead air. Command had sent a recon team to investigate, but they never returned. The last thing they heard from the team was a burst of static, and something else. It took me hours to clean up the recording, but when I finally played it back, I heard it. Screams. Not human screams, though. These were guttural, distorted, like something imitating a human voice, but getting it wrong. Beneath that, faint bursts of gunfire, and then nothing. I couldn't stop thinking about Echo Ridge after that. I started digging, piecing together scraps of information from intercepted communications and old news reports. What I found didn't make sense. The town wasn't large, just a dot on the map, really. A few thousand people, mostly farmers and factory workers. But after the quarantine, it was like Echo Ridge never existed. Government records erased, satellite images blurred. Even the roads leading to the town were blocked off, as if someone wanted the world to forget it had ever been there. But why? What happened in Echo Ridge that was so terrible it had to be erased from history? One night I picked up a strange frequency, a looping broadcast, faint and almost lost in the static. It took me hours to decode it, but when I did, it chilled me to my core. It wasn't words exactly. It was a series of sounds, a crackling fire, muffled footsteps, and what I can only describe as a wet, tearing noise. Then came the voices. They weren't speaking, just making sounds, like someone trying to mimic human speech but failing. One voice, deeper than the rest, repeated the same phrase over and over, though I couldn't make out the words. I've often wondered what became of Jackson. Did he make it out of Echo Ridge, or was he swallowed by whatever horror consumed that town? And then there's the bigger question. Why was Echo Ridge erased? Quarantines and military interventions are one thing, but wiping a place off the map is something else entirely. Someone wanted Echo Ridge to disappear, not just physically, but from memory. I can't say for sure what happened there, but I can tell you this. Echo Ridge isn't the only place that's been erased. There are others, towns, cities, entire regions that have been lost to the outbreak, with no explanation given. Who decides what gets erased, and why? This is Adam Cross, signing off for now. If you're listening, remember, stay sharp, stay safe, and stay alive. This is Adam Cross. If you've been listening, you know that I've been trying to piece together the truth behind this nightmare. Tonight, I want to talk about the man whose name keeps coming up whenever I dig too deep. A man who, for better or worse, may have been at the very heart of it all. His name was Elijah Carr. To the rest of the world, he was a brilliant scientist, a prodigy in genetics and virology. But to me, he was something more. Elijah was my friend. We grew up together, studied together, shared dreams of making the world a better place. And now he's just a name in the dark. I found the first trace of Elijah weeks ago while sifting through old, corrupted military files. His name was buried deep in a classified document tied to something called Project Egress. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I stumbled across an audio log, fragmented, barely audible, but unmistakably his voice. Elijah sounded different in the recording. His usual calm, measured tone was gone, replaced by something raw and unfiltered. He spoke in a hurried whisper, as if he knew someone might be listening. "We weren't ready," he said. "The strain, it wasn't stable, but they pushed forward anyway. They said the risks were manageable. Do they even understand what that means? This isn't what I wanted. This isn't what we were supposed to do. It wasn't supposed to spread." The recording cut off abruptly, leaving only static. I must have listened to it a dozen times, trying to decipher every word, every inflection. This wasn't just a scientist voicing concerns about his work. This was a man on the edge, carrying the weight of a catastrophic mistake. Elijah's name led me to something else. Gen X Dynamics. The name might not mean much to most people, but in the right circles, it's a monolith. A corporate giant with its hands in everything from pharmaceuticals to advanced bioengineering. They were the ones funding Project Egress. The more I dug into Gen X Dynamics, the darker the story became. Publicly, they were pioneers, celebrated for breakthroughs in disease prevention and genetic therapy. But behind the scenes, they were something else entirely. Whistleblower reports, sealed lawsuits, and untraceable funding trails painted a picture of a corporation willing to cross any line in the name of progress. Elijah's work, as far as I can tell, wasn't supposed to be weaponized. He once told me that his dream was to cure genetic disorders, to end suffering. But something changed. The experiments grew larger, the risks greater, and the oversight non-existent. One name kept coming up in my research. Elijah's logs hinted at him. A volunteer, someone who willingly became part of the project, believing they were contributing to something noble. Gen X Dynamics has gone dark since the outbreak. Their buildings abandoned, their executives vanished. But their legacy remains, in the infected, in the destruction, in the whispers of what they unleashed. And then there's Elijah. The last log I uncovered ended with a chilling line. "If anyone finds this, if you're listening, I didn't mean for this to happen, but I think I know how to stop it." The log cut out there, no coordinates, no details, just that cryptic message. So now I'm left with more questions than answers. Where is Elijah? Did he really find a way to stop this? And if he did, why hasn't he come forward? This is Adam Cross, signing off for now. Stay vigilant, my friends. The truth is out there, buried beneath layers of lies and bloodshed, and I intend to find it. If you're listening, stay sharp, stay safe, and stay alive. This is Adam Cross, back with another night on the air. If you've been following my broadcasts, you know the world has become a patchwork of chaos and mystery. Tonight, I'm bringing you a story I almost didn't believe myself. A few nights ago, I received a call from someone who claimed to have escaped from what they thought was a safe zone. I'll be honest, I've learned to take these stories with a grain of salt. Desperation does strange things to people's memories. But something about this caller's tone, it stayed with me. She said her name was Meredith, though I can't verify that. She told me she had been living in one of the early government-established safe zones, one of those places they promised would protect survivors until the military regained control. She didn't say exactly where it was, only that it was in the heart of what used to be a thriving city. At first, everything seemed normal. The zone was heavily guarded, supplies were rationed, and survivors were assigned tasks to keep the place running. But then people started disappearing. At first, it was dismissed as escape attempts or accidents outside the perimeter. But Meredith said the truth was far darker. She overheard soldiers talking late at night, whispers about tests and extractions. One day she witnessed it herself, a man from her barracks being dragged away in the middle of the night. When she asked about him the next day, she was told he'd been relocated to another safe zone. But she didn't believe it. Meredith claimed she found a hidden staircase in one of the abandoned buildings leading to a basement filled with holding cells. Inside were people she recognized, people who had supposedly relocated. She said they were alive but unrecognizable, gaunt, restrained, and covered in scars from surgical experiments. She barely escaped that night. As she fled the basement, alarms blared, and she was chased through the streets by what she initially thought were soldiers. But they weren't soldiers. She called them the wardens. At first glance, they looked like men, dressed in tattered remnants of military uniforms, but their movements were too fast, too precise, and their eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Meredith described them as a horrifying cross between man and monster, intelligent, relentless, and utterly devoid of humanity. She barely made it out alive, escaping the perimeter under cover of darkness. When I asked her what these wardens were, she went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "They're hunting us, Adam. They're not just mindless like the others. They think, they plan, and they won't stop." Now, I'll admit I wasn't sure what to make of her story. Intelligent zombies? It sounded like something out of a bad horror movie. But then Meredith sent me a recording. I hesitated to play it at first. Listening to recordings from the field has a way of sticking with you. But when I finally did, it chilled me to my core. The audio started with heavy breathing and the sound of footsteps on concrete, Meredith's, I assume. Then came a low, guttural growl, unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't just a sound, it was intentional, as though whatever made it was warning her. Seconds later, there was a sharp clang, like metal being wrenched apart, followed by heavy, deliberate footsteps. And then the voice, it wasn't human, it couldn't be, but it tried to be, a deep, rasping tone, forming garbled words that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't make out everything it said, but one phrase came through clear. "Run while you can." The recording ended abruptly after that, with a sharp scream and the sound of something heavy slamming into a wall. I've played that recording over and over, trying to make sense of it. Were the wardens some kind of experiment gone wrong? Or were they something worse, something planned? Meredith hasn't called back since that night. I don't know if she's still out there, or if the wardens found her, but her story raises some terrifying questions. If the infected can evolve, if they can think, then what hope do we have left? This is Adam Cross, signing off for now. If you're listening, stay hidden, stay smart, and above all, stay alive.